So welcome everyone to the January 27th Select Board meeting. My name is Roger Arnold. I am Vice Chair. Claudette Brochu, who is Chair, is with us. She's just feeling a little under the weather and has asked me to step in, but we'll still have the benefit of her participation. So thank you, Claudette, for being with us, even though you're not feeling your best. And then welcome everyone else. We have a full board, as well as Herb Durfee, our town manager, and Miranda Bergmeyer, the town manager's assistant. I find that due to the state of emergency declared by Governor Scott as a result of COVID-19 and pursuant to Addendum 6 to Executive Order 0120 and Act 92, that this public body is authorized to meet electronically. In accordance with Act 92, there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, but however, in accordance with the temporary amendments, I confirm that we are providing public access via Zoom and that there is a dial-in number to participate. All members of the board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously and that the public has access as well. We have provided public notice for how to access the meeting, and there is a dial-in number should you have any problem gaining that access. All votes will be roll call, and then to participate in our meeting, and if you're on Zoom, please go down to reactions and then raise your Zoom hand. That will alert me that you would like to make a comment, and then I will be sure to recognize you. Please state your name and locatable address to do that. And then by phone, please use *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself once recognized. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Any additions, deletions, or what have you? John?
Yes, unfortunately, we need to delete the item for the first reading of the climate designated fund. We don't really have precedence for that, so we're going to have to generate that from scratch. I was hoping I could use precedents from other funds, and they just don't really exist. So we're going to have to generate that from scratch if we continue to think that, unlike the rest of our funds, that one should happen. But regardless, it's not here to read tonight.
Do you think that the board will benefit from a conversation with some of the points that you have just alluded to, or do you think it's best to just take it off the agenda completely?
I'm open either way, but I mean, I think people felt fairly strongly at the time that we should have a guideline for it. So I'm happy to still do that. It's just going to take more time to write it.
Okay. Mary?
I just wanted to say, I think that's the right course of action, because it's always good to deal with the first draft or something in writing, especially if it's complex. So I think it's wise to wait.
Okay, great. So unless others would like to add any more to that, I can say that we'll strike agenda item 11 then. Okay. So, all right. I guess the next item on the agenda is public and select board comments. So are there any comments for items that are not on the agenda? Someone joined us with a full house. Oh, they muted. Okay, so I see two public comments. Apologies, I don't know who was first. Cheryl Lindberg, why don't you get us started?
Okay, thank you, Cheryl Lindberg, 59 Koch Road. Was there another agenda that included an AP warrant listing under consent agenda?
So you're right that the consent agenda is not listed on the agenda itself, but I believe that it is in the packet of materials regardless. So your point is noted.
Okay, so I didn't know if that needed to be added. I just noticed myself.
Okay, so when we make the motion to approve the consent agenda, I will ask that we make sure that we add that language. Stuart Richards, do you have a public comment?
Yes, I do. Am I unmuted?
You are.
82 Elm Street, Norwich, Vermont, Stuart Richards. My comment relates to the Finance Committee and the resignations that were tendered by a number of people, all Finance Committee members in unison together, with the exception of one. I, for the life of me, do not understand why the Select Board took the trouble to solicit people to be on the Finance Committee if you were going to, in the view of the people who resigned, if you were going to ignore these people. They put in a whole lot of work, and I think they deserve to, given the fact that they have certain backgrounds that are and I think were helpful in the way that they looked at things. I think their comments and their help should have been considered. So I think it's sad that that you've gone in the direction that you have gone in, you as the Select Board. I'd also like to make one further comment, and that relates to the open meeting law. And I'm not expecting you to necessarily respond to what I'm saying, because this is really public comment and it's not a back and forth. But I appreciate your at least hearing me out. And the second comment relates to the open meeting law. I've read what you've written to Chris Kentucky and to some others, and I feel you're going in the wrong direction on that one as well. I think it's really important to have public comment and public participation, and you are shutting it down with respect to certain things that are being discussed and should be, in my mind, discussed publicly, and you're not doing that. So again, 2 strikes against you. The third strike, I think you're out of the game. Anyhow, thank you very much. I appreciate your hearing me out. Have a great day.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Just a reminder, reactions to raise your hand by Zoom, otherwise by phone, it's *9 to raise your hand. So Ned Redpath, you have a physical hand up. Would you like to make a public comment?
I apologize. I'm Ned Redpath from 26 Goddard Road in Norwich. And I've never been on this before, so I just didn't know, but I understand that I'm here to support my letter that went to the Select Board with regard to the cut in the police department on, I just want to make sure it was heard, and I didn't know whether this was the time to do it, or do you want me to do some other time?
It's not an item that's on the agenda. So if you have a public comment, then your letter was in the consent agenda. So we've had a benefit of reading it.
Okay. So I don't know whether you need anything else. I just want to reinforce what I'm saying. I just don't, I think we're looking at the wrong thing. And we shouldn't be cutting the services that they offer to the public. That's really all I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. Any more public comment to participate? Stuart, I see your hand up again. Go ahead.
Stuart Richards, 82 Elm Street. I just like to support what Ned was saying. I think it would be very, very ill-advised to cut our police budget. There seems to be a tendency in our country to want to reduce police services. And the effect of reducing police services has been, in a number of instances, too many instances, in my opinion, has been, the effect of that has been very, very negative. So I just raised my hand to support what Ned is saying and what he wrote, which I thought made a lot of sense. I think the services that are provided by Jennifer Frank's department, the police department, and I think they are invaluable. They really are invaluable. And I think they do a whale of a job. And I think that cutting the budget would be sending the wrong message to the police support, to the police department. I think that we want to support them in every way that we can. They believe in, and they have carried out community policing to the nth degree. I have written them and said, I mean, when I ride my bicycle with my grandchildren, their first stop really is the police station, where they get a warm welcome. And that's a tribute to the way that the police department in Norwich operates. It's not true in every community, but in Norwich, it is true. So I would appreciate your very much considering not defunding the police department in any way. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudette. Would you like to make a select board comment? I see that your hand is up.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say that the budget has passed the select board, so it's up to the voters. And I would also say that we have not significantly cut the police budget, and I object to the term defund. So that's one. My second comment is I want to appreciate and acknowledge the work of the Finance Committee. I don't think this is a issue that will, I believe this is an issue that the select board will address going down the road, but it's not one that will be discussed tonight. That's it.
Thank you, Claudette.
And you'll have to put my hand down because I don't know how to do it.
Okay. And then finally, apologies, Demo, I missed your hand, but it is up. So would you like to make a public comment?
That's fine. No apology necessary. Yeah, I would just like to say that, that budget was cut. We're not going to use the word defunding perhaps, but the budget was cut by $600, a little more than. It was, $1,200 was the amount, and you cut it to $653. You also cut another line item. And I asked at that time if you could just take that line item you cut and put it back in and keep it at $1,200. Certainly all of the programs that they're doing are programs that you asked for, that we delivered to you in the Police Services Committee charge. All of those programs are up and running. And for $600, I just think it's cheesy, that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more public comment or select board comment, right? Right. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the consent agenda. Can I get a motion, and can that motion also include, make sure to include the AP warrants? Go ahead, Mary, thank you.
I move to approve the consent agenda, including AP warrants, as enclosed in the packet.
Great, can I get a second?
Seconds.
Great, so Mary, and then John, and then we have public comments, so we'll move into discussion. Cheryl Lindbergh, do you have your hand up?
I do. Sorry, I was unmuting. 59 Koch Road. Am I to believe that when you do pass the minutes that the correction I offered would be included?
That's right. So I did take a note of this, that on page 77 there was a request on our packet. There was a request to revise the minutes as well. So Herb, can you procedurally help me? Can we would have to amend the motion? Is that right?
So if you're gonna change the minutes, you probably just need to pull the minutes and deal with the rest of the consent agenda.
Okay.
Okay, I also had one other question. Did you just add the AP warrant you said in the motion?
We did, but now we have to rescind our motion to make sure the correction to the minutes is included.
Okay, I would have one other question. I can wait on the AP that got added. If you prefer I wait, I'll wait.
Can we not just amend the motion to refer to the change in the minutes?
We can.
Other than pull it, because I don't think there's any debate on that change, right? We just want to make sure we accommodate it.
We can. Cheryl, what is your last point that you wanted to make?
Okay, the other item I was asking about is the the added item for paying the IRS. And while I don't think the select board can answer this, maybe Herb can, having handled also the FICA for a disability situation, it looks like that should be going to an expense account because it's the town's match. And I noticed that that was being put to a payable. So I just wanted to ask that question. And if Herb knows the answer, fine. If not, we can talk about it later.
Yeah, this is an item that we just received 2 days ago in the mail with regard to W-2s and everything that we received for those that were on short-term disability. This is the town's portion of the payment that needs to be made for the FICA Medi. So that's why you got something at absolute last minute. And it has to be done before the end of the month.
My point to you, Herb, would just be check, please, that this is the town's portion, so it is the expense. And my point is that the warrant shows it going to a payable. So I just wanted to make that point as I've handled these for the fire district myself. So it's all expense to the town.
Yep, I know that Cynthia and Becky have chatted about this before it came.
Okay, Mary, can I ask you that you amend your motion to include the correction to the minutes on page 77 of the packet?
All right, I move to amend my motion to include the minutes or the change proposed amendment to the minutes on page 73, 77.
Second.
Great. Roll call. Mary,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
and Claudette.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay. Thank you. That was procedurally messy, I recognize. Okay. The next item is the Beaver Meadow Road Sidewalk Study Report. So we are expecting a report from Dubois and King. And so I would like to hear that report. Then I would like to hear questions from any select board members from the presentation, and then we'll open it up to public comment after that. So I have enabled you to share your screen if that's what you would like to do.
That sounds perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. A foreigner in your midst here, Dayton Kreitz, 29 Pleasant Street, Montpelier, Vermont. Let me see if I can pull my screen up, and I will give, my assumption is that many on this call have, I recognize some faces and names, have been part of the public process in this project. And I would assume that the select board has had an opportunity to review the report as it's been sent out and is sat available on our project website. But I'll give a quick high level view here. And if there's any questions that people want me to spend more time on, I will. But here's the project. Beaver Meadow Road Sidewalk Scoping Study. And all of you that live in Norwich should know this road pretty well. This started sort of back in the midsummer, where we began to look at the possibilities of improving pedestrian access throughout Beaver Meadow Road and what alternatives that might take. As we went through this, the thing I have to say, having worked in planning for the last 10 years, I was amazed at the public input from your town. You guys know how to engage and you know how to speak up. So we had 422 responses to our total surveys and emails coming through. And the high level philosophy is that there is strong support for having improved sidewalk connections, even if that's at the expense of maintenance on existing. There's a really clear indication, and anyone that goes out on Beaver Meadow Road sees this, that it is a multimodal road. People are walking, people are biking, people are driving at all times. And so that was really clear on the project. And there's definitely strong resistance in some extent to spending money on a sidewalk when there's other pressing concerns, or there was also voices saying that this is not a necessary improvement because the road is safe as is. But overall, this blue bar is showing you that overall there's very strong support for developing a sidewalk along Beaver Meadow Road. And that's what we heard when we really just talked about the idea overall. After we talked about the idea with the public and had those first meetings, we created five alternatives here, really. And I should say we created 4 and then evaluated a 5th delivered by the public. So alternative 0 is right along with them. It's doing nothing. We've built alternative 0 for you already. Alternative 1 is looking at a sidewalk on the western side of the roadway and what that might look like. Alternative 2 takes us to the eastern side of the sidewalk or eastern side of the roadway and proposes one there. Alternative 3 says, what if we cross the road? And the thing really driving that is some of these slopes close to Bloody Brook would create real concerns both about long-term maintenance as well as the cost to construct some of the facilities, as well as there's this area just north of Huntley Street here. There's some large exposed ledges that were driving some of that concern. And then we looked at an outside the box idea of saying, well, what if as part of a road project, the roadway expanded to include what we're referring to as mobility lanes. So not just a bike lane, but something that people could walk in, stroller in. And this would be available on both on a sort of a 10-foot swath on one side of the road. And then finally, the Huntley Gap was the, in our second meeting when we discussed alternatives 0 through 4, this was mentioned as a potential alternative. So we added it to the mix of saying, to reduce costs, what if sidewalk was built between Moore Lane and Huntley Street, but then encouraged walkers to walk the safer, quieter Huntley Street before connecting to existing sidewalk past St. Francis of Assisi. So we looked at those, and then a process of evaluation was numerous. We looked both at sort of safety factors, which is these first 3 columns, and I'm not going to bore everyone and read through exactly how this is made, but this table is available in our report. We looked through safety factors. We also looked through the general effect, which looks at what's the impact to property owners, and it should be noted that this is designed to be built within public right-of-way, but public right-of-way adjacent to private property is sort of the impact that we're concerned about here. So we measured, how many different properties do each of these alignments look at? We looked, of course, at the cost. We looked at the natural resource impacts, basically impacts to historic and cultural resources. We looked at sort of the high level sense of construction difficulty. And then when we presented these findings, this whole process, we had a public meeting on Zoom. It was advertised in town. We had a survey up on our project website. We received emails. And as the final, when we presented our alternatives, there was a simple survey afterwards saying, which one do you prefer? And that's what this % vote in favor references. And so we took sort of the average of these sort of implementable and cost-effective effects and the average of these safety effects, added those together to get the results you see on the far right. And the 2 that came out on top were mobility lanes and the western sidewalk. And with a simple glance over towards what the community support numbers are, 24% for the western sidewalk and a whopping 4% for mobility lanes. In discussions with the town manager, we decided that we should go with sidewalk west as our preferred alternative in this scoping study. So I'll walk you through that really quickly. But what we've diagrammed here is how it would work. From Moore Lane, you would have a short piece of the sidewalk extending on the eastern side to a crossing. The main intention there and why we're not crossing further up, this would be part of a second phase of study, but because of the slopes and curves further up Beaver Meadow Road, a crossing here really wouldn't give drivers enough time to see pedestrians in the roadway, and we'd want to draw that back a little bit further. So that's the main driver for that design decision. There'd be movement of a fire hydrant, there'd be movement of a free library there. But then you'd cross the road to the western side and follow that down. And so we've got a section here for what that would look like, with Bloody Brook on this side. No real changes to the road other than this side of the roadway having a sidewalk installed. Further down, this section is illustrating, I think I skipped the plan view there, but this section illustrates immediately north of Huntley Street. It was one of the narrower portions of the roadway where you have this ledge on the western side of the roadway, and then steep slopes coming downhill, retaining walls and other structures that would be required on a sidewalk on that side was one of the reasons that we were driving it towards the west in this case. And in this case, there would be a change to the roadway where, if you notice up here, your travel lanes are 12 feet wide, and that's the standard for the whole roadway. Here, there'd be a slight narrowing as you sort of cut back the pavement and realigned the centerline stripes, but 10-foot travel lanes are perfectly acceptable in a residential context, still allows for delivery vehicles, and if anything is a slight traffic calming measure. So that's how this would look immediately north of Huntley Street. And then as you proceed farther down, this is by Bragg Hill intersection, where there's historic stone walls. And though the technical right-of-way extends beyond those stone walls, those were identified in sort of cultural resources and public comment as something we don't want to disturb. So the sidewalk would be built just inbound of that. There'd be a minor narrowing of the roadway to 11 feet and otherwise no major changes. And of course, the report that we have up available online has all this in much more detail. And as we look at it, what are our final costs? When we factor in construction costs and relocation of poles, fire hydrants, as well as the necessary project management, design, and construction inspection fees that we estimate to be part of any federally funded project, we're looking at just shy of $1 million for the whole thing. And when we say federally funded, typically for most communities around the country, these are supported by projects through the State Department of Transportation, where 80% of the cost is covered from the federal through the State Department down to the town, and 20% is the local match typically. So that's a very quick and high level overview, recognizing that there's lots to be discussed in a select board meeting. I wanted to keep it that way, but that is my short and sweet presentation, and I am happy to answer questions about any of that. And I can stop sharing, or I might wait to see if a couple questions want me to go back to any particular page.
Thank you so much. So I'm wondering if there's any questions from the select board first. And if so, I can't see you, so I trust you to go ahead and raise your voice.
I have a question on the narrowing of the road. This is Mary Layton. Just when a road is narrowed in a few places, but people don't expect it, is it customary to put some signage or in other ways, just alert them to the fact that it's narrow? I think that might catch people out.
Typically not. My answer to that would be that you don't narrow it suddenly like a jog, like all of a sudden there's, something's jutting out into the roadway 2 feet and then the road's 2 feet narrower. You have that happen very slowly. So that loss of say 2 feet would happen over, and don't quote me on this figure because I'm not the engineer to put this exact number together, but it would happen over about 400, 500 feet. And so it's a subtle change in the geometry, and typically you don't need to warn anything. Again, anything down to 10 feet is a really, look up MUTCD standards for travel lanes, and there's really nothing warning you need to do unless you were going much below 10 feet.
Do you have examples where this has been done, where it worked out, or is this just sort of a?
Oh, sure. I mean, in terms of where roadways are 20 feet wide and people travel two-way all the time on them? Is that kind of what you're asking?
No, just that, just wondering if in experience, there might be a community where roads have been narrowed in a couple of places and in a gradual way, as you described.
Sure.
But does that, has that led to any inadvertent side swiping or anything like that that you would know about?
I could follow up with you on that because I don't have anything to answer at this moment about, I know in this town, it's exactly this scenario, but I almost guarantee you I'll be able to find it pretty easily, because these projects of adding, every time we've done a project to add a sidewalk or a shared use pathway or a trail on the side of a road, narrowing roadways are a really common approach when you have a 12-foot roadway, or in some places they have 13 or 14-foot travel lanes with relatively slow speeds. So I could find some examples, but I'd have to follow up with you on that. And I'll make myself a note to try to at least follow up with her to pass that along. Okay,
thank you very much. I have one more question about the ledge area. Would there be some blasting of the ledge, or just set it inboard again and narrow the road?
Right. Our assumption at this point, unless there was significant ledge immediately underneath the roadway, I would assume there's no blasting needed.
Okay, thank you.
That's our intent at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Mary. John, Claudette, or Rob, do you have any? Oh, now I can see you. Do you have any questions for Dubois King?
Yeah. Section 1, Bloody Brook cross section shows a fairly, now this may not be to scale, but shows a fairly steep drop off to the swale. Is that a drainage area also? Is that
It
its
is.
purpose?
That's if you go out to that portion of roadway right now, there's an existing swale off to that side of the roadway right now. It's just a grassy swale, and I think my illustration there is probably a little bit extreme for what that
Exaggerated?
actually
Yeah, okay.
looks like off the road. But if you look at the existing swale, the intention is to rebuild that same just off the west side of the sidewalk there, and it wouldn't be a severe drop quite as I illustrated there.
Okay, thank you.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just ask Herb, has Larry had a chance to review this report, and does he have an independent view on if we were to, not the policy view of whether we should do this, but if we were to do this, which of these alternatives in his view as our leader on these sort of public works issues would be the best one?
That was also my question, Herb. And can you tack on to John's question, can you tack on how did you decide that this was the preferred alternative?
Oh, Larry's here to help if he wants to answer for himself from that standpoint, but we've both of us have been involved in the process and came to generally the same consensus. The generality of the consensus was rooted in the public comment, the surveys that have been looked at, also the public processes. I don't want to call them public hearings, but where we had the public forums and solicited comment and ideas. The part of the things that did play in, of course, are the natural limitations to some of the sidewalk selection process, such as I've watched from that July 1 storm, part of the embankment wash away into part of the roadway, and I'm not too wedded to building a brand new sidewalk on that side of the road, on the eastern side of the road, and to know that there's going to be another storm someday, and to watch that wash away. So the western side seemed to be the general location to stick to, and that had the least amount of natural issues. And then it also seemed to play in with regard to some of the comment that we had. Admittedly, it does have a crossing to get over there, but again, trying to balance all of the different issues. So I would say that Larry had the same perspective, but I'm not an engineer, he is, so he could provide his experience from his own voice if he wishes to speak tonight.
Larry, would you like to speak towards John's question?
Yeah, when I look at the project, I just look at it as physical constraints. It appears to me that the west side is the side where you have some your best chance of staying away from impacts to the residents. It's not an impossibility to put a sidewalk there, but it's going to cost money. I think it's very difficult sometimes, from my past experience, to put a sidewalk in front somebody's front yard very close to their home, and I certainly can appreciate that. So I think the west side has a lot of merit from that point of view. Whether we stay away from the riverbank or not, I think that the riverbank has those issues, but it could be stabilized. But it seems like the west side is the area that has the most possibilities and potential.
Okay.
Roger, I have a
Yes,
question.
go ahead, please.
A couple of questions. The report recommended granite edging, and I'm just wondering about the impact of plowing with the granite edging. Is there more of a risk of snow accumulation against that edging and narrowing the road further, and or a potential impact to the plow blades themselves with the granite edging? That's one question. Then my second question is looking Dayton, looking at that table that you had presented, you said option 2 was the mobility lanes, but that had the least public support, I believe. So how did that rank as number 2 as an option?
I'm happy to, I mean, it numerically ranked as number 2, right? Which is why we balance sort of the numbers of this all with the narrative of it. So it lost in, if you'd like to go into the metrics, I can throw that up there again. I feel it's easier to talk through, but you really just kind of going through the numbers here. So one of the biggest impacts was that now you're kind of forcing me to look through these numbers here, but it had sort of the best adjacent property scoring because it stayed immediately on the roadway at all points. It never sort of went further out like a sidewalk would. So we gave it highest marks there. It had very high marks for being the lowest cost option. Just expanding roadway with additional asphalt is less expensive than building a sidewalk and related facilities and moving, some of the utilities that are required for part of that. And it had high marks in not having any areas of impact for historical cultural resources. And it was, it was a high difficulty construction, but basically the numbers came out to give it a higher score, but I don't quite, again, we looked at that and we looked at what came out with the sidewalks and said, mobility lanes were in no way a preferred option by the public. So we're not going to consider that, even though it came out high in the numeric rankings.
Okay.
And then as for the granite curbing, we were modeling that off of many other roadways we've seen constructed successfully for years throughout Vermont. And so we don't know of any significant impacts to plow blades because of those. In terms of issues with snow clearing, that's constantly an issue with sidewalks anywhere that are adjacent to the roadway. What we tried to do in this design, wherever possible, where there are other constraints weren't pushing this sidewalk to be next to the road, we tried to leave 3 feet or more, as much room as we could really between the edge of the roadway and the beginning of the sidewalk. In a number of places in this design, it allowed us to reduce costs by not requiring curbing. Once you leave about 4 or 5 feet between road edge and the sidewalk, then you don't need curbing, and it provides a place for snow. But in many places, because of ledge, because of an adjacent property, because of a historic wall, we had to put it right up next to the roadway. So that's kind of the driving decisions there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I will point out that we've had a lot of public correspondence on this, and that in the next packet, we'll also see a petition with a few, I think 150 approximate signatures in support of the project. Demo, you say you have your hand up, so I'll let you make your public comment. But then after that, I'll do a final. I'll start public comment with Demo. But before I open it up to public comment, Herb, is there anything that you would like to say framing this project? I want to discuss some of the implementation, and I see that there's also a motion in the packet to consider. So I just want to give you a chance to frame any of this any further before I take public comment, and then we go back to talking a little bit about implementation as presented to us.
Sure. I think it's just I think there are some considerations with regard to if you opt to move forward. And again, you need to decide whether you'd like to move forward. If there is a next logical step, it would be phase 2 of 3 phases. A second phase would deal with doing some true survey work, doing some right-of-way easement work, the true engineering to come up with design plans in the event that you decide to move forward with a third phase, which would be sort of the pre-construction construction phase. So that if you wanted to do something along those lines, there still is this same grant program available, and it would be mid-June when that application is due. So there is time to have some additional discussion, whether you want to do some kind of any public forum or something like that. You clearly have time to do that. If you were to get a grant, again, it would be on that 80%, 20%, with 20% being the local match. And so even though you've addressed the budget already for this year, you can move forward with an application process. The local match for the phase 2 could be garnered from the sidewalk designated fund, as a for instance, should you get a grant, and because at that, based on the information that Dayton has provided from Dubois and King, that amount would be approximately $20,600. So I think I'm just trying to add some perspective of where you are now to where you could be, say, before July 1.
Okay, great, Herb. That's helpful. So I'm going to open it up to comments. Please, to the extent possible, keep it to 3 minutes because I do see a few faces. Yes, name and locatable address. And I see we can start with Demo. Go ahead.
Yes, just want to offer a quick statement and a little bit of history if I could. So several years ago at a Town of Norwich Transportation Subcommittee meeting, I was asked by the Select Board to lead a petition drive to have the Advanced Transit Bus Company extend the Brown Route bus to make a complete loop around Main Street to Turnpike Road, Moore Lane, and then a left on Beaver Meadow and head back to town. At the time, they thought it would fit in nicely with the park and ride that the state and the town had planned for Huntley Meadows. The petition was successful and the bus loop is in existence today and doing very well even during this pandemic. At the time, there were discussions about eventually making a sidewalk on Beaver Meadow Road to connect to Moore Lane so that the residents could walk to the park. This would complete the loop, so to speak. The discussions continued year after year, Select Board after Select Board. They kept talking about it. Other things were more pertinent, and so it never materialized. A complete sidewalk loop around Beaver Meadow / Turnpike Main would improve the quality of life and safety for the residents of Norwich. This is the so-called in-town loop. This so-called in-town loop is a great place for people to walk, bike, etc. And using the existing park and ride locations makes it a convenient and safe place to park their vehicles and enjoy the outdoors and maybe save a little gas. In closing, it makes perfect sense to close the loop if it can be done safely and with minimal disruptions to property owners on the street. I held off on commenting on this for a long time because it really pained me to see somebody's property get torn up. Especially if it's a short piece of property to get torn up for a sidewalk. But when this western alternative popped up, that kind of energized my way of thinking. So in closing, I would favor the west side sidewalk as it would be the least disruptive to the neighborhood, considering, of course, that it can be done safely. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you. Stuart Richards, you are next. You have to unmute yourself, sir.
Stuart Richards, 82 Elm Street. Dayton, thanks so much for the clear presentation. Very, very helpful. I had questions regarding the actual town share of the cost. Where is the money that is not paid by the town coming from, and how sure is it that we would be able to get the $800,000 or whatever the number ends up being? Can you explain that for us a little bit?
Yeah, I can explain that briefly, and I think
actually, if you may, I would like to get through public comments, and then that is something that we will loop back around.
Okay.
Thank you.
A couple other questions that perhaps you could answer at the end or whenever it's workable. Can you tell us what costs have been incurred so far, in addition to what is expected to be paid for by the town at the end, and then And is it the first alternative that you've described, the one that's at the top of the page? And I guess that's alternative number one. Is that the one that we would be proceeding on? And last question, and sorry to be so questioning here, but last question is, will this be put to a town vote at some point as a warned article, either at a special town meeting or at the regular town meeting? So thanks for entertaining all the questions.
Thank you, Stuart. I wrote them down. Next is Louise Hamlin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to say, first of all, how very grateful I am that you've changed the idea of putting, I live at 166 Beaver Meadow on the east side of the road, and the sidewalk would have been in my living room because there was a very, very shallow, very shallow lawn there. And I think I sent my list of concerns. I think the select board received them. And I appreciate if they read them and thought about them. I appreciate it very much. And have many fewer objections if the sidewalk would go on the west side. Of course, safety of our children, there's nothing more important, but at what cost to daily life? My remaining questions are, what effect would the $20,000 that the town would contribute, what effect would that have on the town budget? Is it available, and what would it mean that could not be done with that money? I'm thinking particularly of the ventilation of town hall and the septic system at the Marion Cross School. And the other question is, who is responsible for the maintenance of this sidewalk? And what cost would that be forever to the town? And those are my only, I have other small concerns, but nothing important.
Thank you so much. Good questions. I also wrote these down to maybe circle back on if we have time. So thank you so much. Any other public comments? I'm not seeing any.
Somebody raise their hand.
Stuart, I've noted. I'm going to see if there are other folks before I circle back to you. So just as a reminder, you go to reactions and then push star hand.
It's not coming up on my screen, unfortunately. Oh, wait a minute here.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, I see Peter Orner's physical hand up. So Peter, you go, and then, oh no, you did it, so thank you. Peter Orner, name and locatable address, and then I'll circle back to Stuart. And then I see other comments as well.
I'll be real brief because you guys have heard from me a number of times on this. Peter Orner, 6 Moore Lane. I just want to thank Dayton for the presentation and for all the hard work of his team. And I really appreciate the select board, going forward with the scope and you as an elected body listening to us. And I also really appreciate the public comment, both pro and con. But I think it's, as Dayton said, I think it's pretty clear there's a great deal of support for this. And more importantly, a great deal, to echo Demo, a great deal of concern about the safety on the road and completing the loop. And at this point, I think we're in a situation where we might be waiting for something horrible to happen to make this a much different discussion. As Dayton started out his presentation, it is a multi-use road every single day. There are people on that road who are pedestrians, who have no protection against a speeding car. And I'm afraid that we are in a situation where we're waiting for a distracted driver, or if God forbid, somebody's had a few too many drinks at Salt Hill at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon on a winter's evening. I think we need to act and listen to the will of the voters who have been speaking on this. But our group, my group, has been very patient, and we've tried to go through all the right channels and to listen and to dialogue, and we want to continue to do that. But there is, as Pam Smith said last week, a sense of urgency here. So I hope we can all do the right thing. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. I see Hillary. Can you state your name and locatable address for us and then make your public comment?
Hillary Lynch, and I'm at 15 Heritage Lane. And I haven't put it into any other place, but I wanted to voice my support for the sidewalk and appreciate all the work that's gone in, and also feel like it would be a wonderful safety measure for kids. And that's about it. I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Pam Smith. Go ahead.
Pam Smith, 1445 New Boston Road. I was wondering if there's going to be a traffic study done for this. I know there was something in the survey about how people use the road, but when you talk about narrowing the road down to 10 feet, just wondering, how big are the trucks that are traveling this route? And, how many trucks on a daily basis or weekly basis will that kind of study be done?
Thanks, Pam. Are you finished? Otherwise, I've noted your question.
I am, thank you.
Thank you. And then I see two, then I see Stuart once more. Go ahead, Stuart.
Just unmuting. Stuart Richards, 82 Elm Street. Last question, I think, is what's the situation with the existing sidewalks? Having been a user of the existing sidewalks, seems to me that they are not in very good condition. And I suppose you could say that differently. But I certainly would like to see the existing sidewalks get some attention. And I have a feeling that we should be, if we're going to be building new sidewalks, why aren't we taking care of the existing sidewalks? Or at least that's my perception, is that we're not taking care of the existing sidewalks. So, and I don't know how much money is involved here to take care of the existing sidewalks, but it seems like it would be money well spent to repair them so that they're in decent condition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments? Aaron Lamperti.
Hi, I know I'm coming a little late to this discussion in terms of, I haven't, sorry, Aaron Lamperti, 557 New Boston Road. But I did read through the report earlier today, and I was struck by some aspects of the mobility lane option, and I was surprised to see it rise so high in the rankings based on its merits. So when I see something rise on its merits, I think rather than that it's unpopular, but that it's a educational opportunity. I think this is maybe the best option in many ways, especially for bicyclers. And bicycles are very popular right now. There's an increase, I think, in people's using bikes, particularly e-bikes. And when you narrow the lanes, you actually make it riskier for bicycles who can't really use the sidewalk. So I'm of the mind that you should, whatever you do going forward, keep the mobility lane option in the picture as a possibility and consider advocating for it. Maybe it's not the best option, but it seems to me that it has a lot of merit. So I'm just off of that opinion.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Final call. Okay. There was a lot of questions that came up in public comment, which is really wonderful. This is where I always struggle as chair, right? Or like when I chaired the two instances that I have, because I would want to just discuss them, but we're scheduled for another 10 minutes to discuss this agenda item. So, for the benefit of all, I'll, read the questions that came up, and then maybe we'll try to answer some of them. And then I want to go back into the next step portion, and then, they'll obviously be to be continued. So the questions that came up is, can you tell us the cost that has been incurred so far? What are some funding sources for this project? Is the west sidewalk alternative the only subject of future discussion? Should the mobility lanes be given a second look? Will this be put to a town vote? What effect will the cost of this project have on other capital projects? How is it being prioritized with those projects? Will there be future updated traffic studies? Who maintains the existing sidewalks? What about the existing sidewalks and their condition? Is there then sidewalk designated fund, which is another question. So yeah, all really, really good questions. So I'm gonna ask Herb to maybe engage Herb a little bit in this Q&A for the benefit. We'll see, we'll do this for 2 minutes. Can you tell us the costs incurred so far, Herb?
So I can, the costs incurred so far, I have to go back into my, I can't give you that number right now, but I can tell you that the contract that we have with Dubois and King is for $26,586. But if we did a local share on that of the 20%, the town is on the hook for $5,317. The grant that we received from the state was up to $26,400 with a local match of up to $6,600. So the formal bidding process that we did technically saved us some money in the long run for this particular phase of the project. I know that we've received two bills so far from Dayton's office, and then generally with the conclusion of the presentation tonight and the finalization of the report, they would file their remaining amount of money for the contract that's a not to exceed sum.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then some other questions. Herb, do you happen to know the status of the sidewalk designated fund?
So there was about $80,000 in there at the last look. The budget has in it an additional $14,000 for the coming fiscal year that's before voters this March.
Great. Herb, can you talk to us about the existing sidewalks? What documents have been produced to date that tell us the story of our existing sidewalks?
With regard to the maintenance aspect of things?
Yes.
But what people have to understand is that the bulk of sidewalks in the town actually belong to the fire district. So, and I can tell you the fire district has budgeted $0 for sidewalks for a long time. There has been one idea when Steve Flanders was on the board was to say, everybody knows these are in the town should just take over the sidewalks. And there was a little bit of discussion back and forth about whether we need a status of those particular plans or those sidewalks. So there is in the budget, at least in the capital budget, and as mentioned in the for the budget for other projects under the highway department contracted services, the intent to do an update on the sidewalk inventory, which would give us the answer to Stuart's question in terms of priorities and what needs to be repaired, that sort of thing. We would include the fire district sidewalks as part of that study, since most people are probably, when they talk about sidewalks, they're thinking mostly of fire district sidewalks.
Okay, great. And I think the other questions about will this be put to a town vote? How is it being prioritized in other capital projects? Will it mean possibly compromising in some of our other projects? I think these are policy questions for the board that I don't think we have the space for right now, but will be subject to continual discussion.
Can I just interrupt for a second? I would just say that the capital budget is a logical place to have some of this, that Larry and I have in the real purpose of getting behind doing the updated inventory is so that the priorities can mesh in with the capital budget and program and ultimately the budget process, that the budget process, at least to go through voter approval. If you obviously, I agree with you at the policy level that if you get to the phase 3 aspect of things, you have the choice of either doing a town vote to go that route or factoring something into the budget process.
Okay, great. So now I want to actually turn it over to the board to talk about what the motion says. We have a motion that calls for more public sessions, and then Herb has presented to us that a logical conclusion is to go on to phase 2. And so I want to hear from folks about whether or not this is, if this is a logical next step for this process. Anyone?
Yes. I think we need to move forward on it. I think it's clear that there's a lot of interest in it, and it's beneficial in many, many ways. And it becomes a question of, does the town want to pay for it?
John, go ahead.
I agree. I'm very in favor of moving forward with this to the next step. There's been a lot of homework done on this. It was an incredibly inclusive process. The report was very solid, I thought. And we have a reiteration of the support that they found in their report in the form of a petition that over the last 2 days got 150 signatures at a time when people can't go out to the transfer station and collect signatures. So I think that was quite a statement as well to push this forward to the next stage.
Mary or Claudette? You have to unmute yourself, Mary.
Yes, I am in favor of moving forward. I think it would be a great asset for the town to have a loop. It has many health, environmental, and safety benefits. So I am in favor of moving forward on it.
Claudette, can you share your thoughts with us, if you would like?
Yeah, I'm okay with using or going to the next step. I think that's going to tell us if we're going to have problems with obtaining easements.
Yeah.
And going forward with, I would hope, a town vote.
Yeah.
But I think the next step is fine with me.
Okay, my one question for her, because I agree with everyone, is I too am intrigued by that's not a good word, but the mobility lanes. I think we should kind of embrace that as an option. I mean, I understand that the whole point of this deliberative process is to then move on one of the alternatives after, and the West Side Sidewalk is that alternative. But, I think I've heard there's been enough curiosity about the mobility lanes where I wonder if, how can you bring that into the conversation for phase 2? Maybe Dubois and King or Herb can answer that question if the board thinks that's a worthy question. Does that make sense?
You can factor that in. I mean, obviously you want to move forward with the preferred alternatives so that you focus the funding that you may get through a grant program and local funding to the specificity of the project that you're looking at. But the mobility lane can still be continued to look at as part of that particular process. And then basically at the end of that process, or at least during that process, before you get to the tail end, you'll need to determine in which direction that you're headed. Because if you head to phase 3, you're headed into construction from that standpoint. So you will want to have a final strategic direction to go in.
Okay. So it's 7:35, so we reached the time for this agenda item. There's a motion that talks about more sessions, more information sessions. Are people in favor of that? Or I suppose, can I get someone to read the motion, make a motion? Can you make the motion? Thanks, Mary.
I move to schedule public hearings on February 10th and February 24th, 2021 to solicit public input on the draft report and to gauge public support for moving forward with an application for a 2021 VTrans bike pedestrian grant for phase 2 of the 3-phase project.
Is there a second?
Second. Oh, okay.
So Mary and then John. Is there any discussion on that?
Just to be clear on those dates, so are we saying that that will be part of our select board meeting? Or is this something that you're anticipating being separate?
The motion that I drafted, it would be part of your regular meeting agendas.
Okay, great.
So Stuart, I see your hand up again. So go ahead with while noting that we're a little over time on our agenda.
Very short. The question that I asked originally with respect to the $200,000 plus or minus and the remainder of $800,000 plus or minus, how sure is the remainder to be available to Norwich, $800,000? Is that something that we're likely to be able to get, or somewhat likely, or not so likely? Or if you have any comment on that, that would be helpful, I think.
I can give some input on that if you want.
Please briefly, go ahead.
So in essence, there is when you work through the process of the grant source, as you work through in different phases, you do gain a higher point value if you're showing movement toward the construction aspect of things. Obviously, it is a competitive grant program, so there are no guarantees. But again, you do get a higher point value if you're showing that you're moving forward. For instance, if we hadn't done the scoping study and just applied for, say, phase 2 money, if there were equal projects coming in, the likelihood of a town doing a scoping analysis first to determine feasibility and, for instance, the support that we have it so far, that scores more heavily than if someone just goes in blind with a construction or a pre-construction situation. So there aren't guarantees, but it does help to go along the way to show that you've incrementally moved forward and garnered the support of the project.
Right. So assuming the availability of fund from the state, we would potentially be a very competitive application. Okay, so we have a motion. So that motion was to just continue this discussion at our future meetings. So I'm going to ask for a roll call. Mary?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Claudette?
Yes.
And then Rob?
Yes.
Okay.
And you?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So we agree to continue to discuss, which is government, perhaps. Okay. So thank you. I guess I realize, I don't know if Dubois and King is still here. I don't know if you would like to add anything further. Otherwise, I would just say thank you and we'll move on in our agenda.
Well, thank you very much. We'll put some of the comments heard tonight in the final version of the report and provide that to you shortly. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the local hazard mitigation plan. And so we are required to adopt the plan. I'm seeing, so I will say, so there was some comments, there were some recommendations we heard back from TROC. Do folks want to talk about these recommendations in any way? Otherwise, I could just take the motion to adopt it. No comments? Okay. Otherwise, is there a motion? Mary, can I count on you?
Sure. I move to approve the certificate of adoption and resolution adopting the Norwich, Vermont 2020 local hazard mitigation plan as included in the select board meeting packet.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so I guess the discussion would be, does anyone want to talk about any of these recommendations that were listed? Otherwise, I'll do a roll call. John, did you want to discuss anything? No, okay. No discussion. Claudette, I can't see you, so I can't see your facial cues.
No questions.
Okay, so let's do a roll call. Claudette?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And then Rob?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay. The stop yield ordinance. This is the first reading of an updated stop yield ordinance, and the draft policy is in the packet. So this is an updated, this is meant to replace previous ordinances, and there's a very thoughtful memo that accompanied it. Unless anyone wants to provide a summary or turn to the drafter, our police chief, for summary, I would just ask if there are any questions or comments. Are there any questions or comments? Otherwise, we could have the benefit of a summary, but I think it was well laid out in the packet. Mary, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just would like to hear from the police chief about it, if she's still here.
Okay, we can do that. Go ahead, police chief, if you may.
Chief Jennifer Frank from the Norwich Police Department. This ordinance is just updating the previous ordinance. The original ordinance was written in 1972 and only included 13 stop signs and 4 yield signs. As our traffic has updated and our roads have increased over the years, additional stop and yield signs have been included. However, they were not added to the ordinance. This updated ordinance does not add additional signs that are not there, nor does it take any away. It's also not evaluating whether stop signs should or should not be in these locations. All it is doing is currently updating our current inventory to show that instead of the original 13 stop signs and 4 yield signs, we now currently have 72 stop signs and 8 yield signs. The other added benefit to this is it makes sure that we're current with best practices in law. And the additional benefit is that all stop sign ordinances that are listed in towns increases the financial benefit back to the community in the event any citations were going to be written on them.
Thank you.
That's great. Does anyone have any questions about the ordinance? So obviously this writing ordinances is the prerogative of us as policymakers. So I appreciate that we have a draft before us, right? It's, that's generous. I mean, I had one comment unless others have anything. So I was just a little, this ordinance, this updated, obviously it's really important to have like the conditions on the ground be reflected in the ordinance, but I'm noticing that there was an enforcement, section in there, and it cites a statute that defines the, what sort of constitutes a law enforcement officer. And so I thought that was, I mean, it kind of raised, I lifted eyebrow a little bit because, there's nothing in to my knowledge, there's nothing in traffic laws that specifically define law enforcement as the folks who oversee the traffic enforcement. And so this was saying that the enforcement will come from the police as defined, a law enforcement officer as defined in this statute. So I had wondered why it was necessary to include that. And then from a cursory look into other traffic ordinances, there wasn't that mechanism in the ordinance. So that's an addition, and I would prefer if it was not included.
If you'll allow me to speak to that, the drafting of the ordinance is directly from the state of Vermont recommendation for the ordinance itself. This is the standard municipal state yield and stop sign ordinance. The only modifications that the town of Norwich took liberty here with were the actual names of the streets and the names of the intersection. I can forward over to you, and I might be able to find it and add it to the hyperlink, the state of Vermont speed study survey, which directly refers to this. Again, this is the state standard and statute. It's not anything that we added in, and I can forward that along to you as well.
Yeah, I just, if there's a recommendation to include an enforcement mechanism, and that enforcement mechanism be like the statute that defines what a law enforcement officer is, then I would be curious to know, but otherwise I would not include that. But yeah, that was my only thinking. So is there, with that, I'll ask for a motion.
All right. I move to accept the first reading of the Town of Norwich Stop Yield Sign Ordinance as contained in the Select Board meeting packet.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Go ahead, Herb.
Just quickly, just make sure you folks understand this is not being adopted like a policy, but it's adopted as an ordinance. So once you get to the point where you adopt it, it does not take effect until 60 days after the date of adoption, has to be posted in the paper and all that sort of stuff. So I just want to make sure you understand the difference between ordinance and policy.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Any other discussion?
Yeah, if I may.
Mhm.
The only thing I took notice of is that the chief mentioned this is an income center. And to me, it strikes me that the traffic signs are for controlling traffic and promoting safety in the town, and should not be seen as an expected income source.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm keen to agree. Any other comments? I see that Chief Frank has her hand up.
If I could just clarify that, I was not intending to indicate that it was a additional traffic or income revenue source. What I was trying to note was that the money was redirected differently. Let's suppose that a fine for something is $100. The fine remains $100 no matter what. I was just noting that in one case, $80 of the 100 goes to the state and perhaps 20 would go to the town if it is written under a state ordinance. If it's written under the town ordinance, then $50 perhaps would go to the state and $50 would go to the town. It's not being used as a revenue income generator. I was just noting that it does change because you had asked what difference this makes. It does change that more of the revenue would go directly to the town instead of to the state. I think we've shown an establishment through the police department that we understand that traffic enforcement is designed for safety and to change and modify behavior. This is purely just noting that there would be a difference in where the money went. It doesn't add or decrease money in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion. So, I mean, I think for me, I want to look into that enforcement piece a little bit, the enforcement question, and then just maybe have some comments for the second reading. But otherwise, let's do a roll call vote. Mary?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Claudette?
Yes.
I'm a yes. So that was the first reading of this ordinance. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Chief Frank. Okay, the FEMA grant request. So I see that someone from Matt Sweat from the fire department is here. Would you just like to orient us a little bit into this grant request?
Sure. This is a micro grant. The AFG grants are open every year. Last year we applied for replacement air packs, but we didn't get that grant. This year we're applying for what's called a micro grant, and so it's for a lesser dollar. And we're applying for a battery operated auto extrication tool. You know, if you're watching TV, you might hear it referred to as the jaws of life. And we're looking for 2 rescue jacks, which both of these tools help us at any sort of auto accidents where we have to remove the car around the patient and get them out, or to stabilize the car so we could work safely to help the occupants inside. It's a 95.5% grant, so the feds pick up the majority of the tab, and I believe we're just asking for your okay to submit the grant.
So this has been, does anyone have any questions? I have a procedural thing. But does anyone have any questions of Matt while we have him? John, did you have? So I guess my process point, maybe John was going to do this, was, you know, Herb, why are we exactly being asked to do this? Is it just because you know, it
But
seems like
there's-
we're getting a pat. Go ahead. Is it
Sorry.
designated?
Didn't mean to interrupt, sorry. Simply because there's a local match required as on the smaller end of things, as most grant programs, where because of the local match, I bring stuff for you folks to approve so that if we do apply for it and get it, that you know what's coming down the road with regard to the warrant.
Okay. And the matching grant is expected to come from designated fund spending or from operating?
It would come, right, it would come from the designated fund for equipment.
Okay, so in that case, it makes this is our ask then. Okay. Does anyone have any questions of either Matt or Herb? Otherwise, is there a motion? Can I count on Mary again?
Sure. I move to authorize the town manager to apply for funding through the 2020 Assistance to Firefighters Grant, with the understanding that the town of Norwich will be responsible for payment of matching funds equal to 5% of the grant amount total.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Any further discussion? Claudette or Rob?
No.
Are there, quick one, are there personnel on the department that are trained in the use of these pieces of equipment?
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so I'm also the training officer. Every year we have at least a month, well, 4 Mondays worth of training or 3 Mondays worth of training every year on auto extrication. I'd like to thank Sable and Sons, who are kind enough to, on their dime, bring us over at least 3 different wrecked cars. And then the town, the guys at Public Works let us use some space there, and they flip the cars in all different positions with their loaders, and we go at it and really practice cutting up the cars, getting patients out. Where we always add new content, how to cut apart electric cars, which offer more complications for us. And so yeah, that's a long answer, but yeah, we train on these all the time, and we actually borrowed a set from Hanover because we don't have this kind of electric tool right now, and so we borrowed a set from Hanover to kind of demo it and see what we would like to purchase in the future.
Have we lost any dummies in the process?
One lost a leg.
Oh.
But that wasn't our fault.
Okay.
That was a flipping error.
Flipping error.
That's a flipping error. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. All right. So do we do the roll call? No. Okay.
Nope.
No, we didn't. Oh.
Okay. Great. So would we like to do that?
Sure.
All right. Mary. John.
Yes.
Rob.
Yes.
Claudette.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Okay. Oh, okay. What is next? Oh, we're on a break. So is it a 10-minute break? What did Claudette have for us?
10 minutes.
She gave us 10 minutes. Okay, so it's now 7:55. Be back at 8:05. Does that sound good?
That's good. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Clock. Okay, so I'm resuming the January 27th Select Board meeting. See that we have everyone here, I believe. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the December 2020 financial reports, and it's a discussion. Herb, can you orient us in this agenda item a little bit? What is it that we need to know about our December 2020 financials, or what you think that we should know?
Sure, there are a couple things I'll just update you or point you to in the reports. Obviously, you're through the December with this report, so should be about halfway through the year. Just want to make sure, just again, a couple pointers that on the revenue side of things, under miscellaneous revenue, I'm looking at the second page of the revenue report. that there's some unbudgeted revenues with regard to highway department miscellaneous and overall miscellaneous. The highway one, I believe, relates mostly to the Brown Schoolhouse Road pedestrian bridge loan that we received. And there's an offsetting expense on the expense side. On the miscellaneous, I have to look into that one to see what it is with regard to with Becky. I just spotted that one today, so I have to get an update on that. And I've already got an email into Becky to get that update. Other than that, the revenues look pretty good and strong for the year so far. On the expense side of things, a couple things I want to point out. First, on the first page of the expenses, our professional services line item continues to grow, unfortunately. Just to highlight that, a lot of that has to do with the professional services that we had to incur with regard to the open meeting law questions that came before us. That was, so far, that's in the neighborhood of just over $8,000. We had the age discrimination input that we had to, legal input we had to get from that. We had just started to deal with a recent personnel matter that I updated you on at the last meeting. So there'll be a little bit more with regard to that. It also included finishing up the union contract negotiations. And then, of course, what's in there too is that second of the third state payments to repay the Church Street sidewalk project. So that one, unfortunately, that one's over budget and will continue to go over budget for a while. Just noting that this report, even though we're 6 months in, we've paid out all the designated funds except for one. I have to check with Becky as to why there's one that got missed, but we'll get to that. I owe you some analysis with regard to the finance assistant, finance officer, and juxtaposed or in addition with the NEMRIC bulk time arrangement and the temporary contract that we have. I just want to be more resolved in my thinking as to where we sit with regard to that, because we also stole, you agreed to allow me to steal some of this year's money for the laborer position under highway. So there's a little bit of a line transfer that would be occurring with regard to that. So I just wanted to highlight that I do need to owe you some work on that. On the recreation side of things, which is the fourth page of the expenses, just to highlight, because the revenues were down, are lagging on the revenue side for recreation programs, but because we're not offering a lot of recreation programs, the expenses are lagging as well. So there's a general offset there. It's not a perfect offset, but just want to make sure that when you look at one or the other, that you got to look at the, if you just look at expenses, you got to look at revenue. If you look at revenue, you got to look at the expenses. And that's COVID related, of course. The police department on page 5 under the wages and benefits, just I'm watching the health insurance line item, and that's because there were a couple of employees that had a change to their situation where they were allowed to make changes to their plan after you folks budgeted dollars and after the voter type of stuff. So that one, that you have no choice about that, but that will be an over budget line item. And I can't get into the specifics of it without really getting into confidential discussions, but essentially it's the allowance of a couple employees to make changes to their healthcare arrangements. I want to point out under the same page, under the cruiser maintenance, that we want to watch that line item just because a number of the crew, even though we have a new cruisers, the other cruisers are spending a lot of time in the shop, and that line item is still a little bit below budget, but I want to watch that one throughout the course of the year. Over on page 8, the emergency management line items, I need to talk to Becky about the debt service. The principal and the interest have been included in the principal line item. You can see that there's a payment, but I'm I don't know why there's still a little bit left over from the budget, because usually that's a pretty easy item to pay for and know what the line is. So I've got to do some additional research on that. Under the public highway division, Public Works, the highway division with the wages, and I mentioned some of it before, but we're under budget with the road crew wages as well as the related things such as FICA and Medicare. And that's because we don't have the laborer in a hired position, so that will be less, but there will be some of that the allowance of the transfer of that line item that may help out with the financial officer side of the equation. You can see on the next page, page 9, under the materials for DPW, we have the Brown Schoolhouse Bridge there. There's the offset with regard to some of the loan that we received on the other. This is the total project cost as related to the contract that we had, and the loan and some donations is what offset the cost there. There on page 10, there still are some receivables that are owed us for reimbursement on the grants under Public Works, so for the highway garage that we're dealing with. So that's why you see some expenses that are there. I mean, but they're not yet fully realized on the revenue side. So again, there's an area that I'm working with Becky to get those reimbursements in as we can. Over on page 11 there, and it's going to continue on to page 12, just pointing out that the assessment for the solid waste district has been paid in full for the year, and that our insurances have been paid in full for the year. So when you look, I make the same statement every year. We've basically paid all the designated funds that we need to transfer over. We've done the insurances, we've paid that assessment, even though we're only halfway through the year. So there are some line items that are fully paid for. But if you look at the overall budget, all the appropriations, the other monetary articles have been paid except for 4. The larger ones I pay in halves throughout the year according to our tax thing, but all the other appropriations have been paid. So it would not be unnatural this time of year to see us go a little bit over the 50% mark. But if you look at the bottom line for the expenses, right now we're the normal 50% of our budget would be about 2.45 million. We're at 2.58 million, so we're at about 52.5% of budget through December. So we're on target, but even better is that there are a number of line items that we have paid in full. So we're actually to the good right now when you just look at a broad-based situation with regard to the expenses balanced off with the revenues.
Okay.
Is that
yeah
maybe more detail that you wanted, but I wanted to point out some of the areas that stood out with me.
That's great. Does anyone have any other questions for her about the December 2020? I have one question, and then if it takes longer than 35 seconds, maybe it's just a future agenda item. But and I think Claudette has asked a version of this question, but rather than incurring so much costs on these cruisers, should there be a consideration of a change of operations for their use, as opposed to just continually use them the same way and just incur costs on their maintenance?
I don't understand that question, but okay.
So just don't use all the cars, and then you don't need to incur all the costs to maintain them. Take them out of it. That's one of the, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. In less than 35 seconds, that we have the new cruiser. We do, as you heard the chief say, we're trying to go from 4 to 3 vehicles so that there is less use from that standpoint. But you do have, when they are going in and out of the shop, you do need to have to use another vehicle from that standpoint. And I will continue to remind you that one of those cruisers has lost a wheel in motion. So, we are at a situation where you need to purchase another cruiser, but that's a different agenda item.
Yeah, well, if it's the 4th cruiser, that's supposed to be taken out of rotation anyway, just take it out of rotation. But anyway, yeah, maybe a future agenda item for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Only one other thing is that temp should be coming on very shortly. It'll be Seth Robertson, and he and I have already chatted. And one of the major items that I've talked to him about is monthly year-end report, monthly reporting, year-end reporting as a for instance, and I've mentioned as a for instance the Hartford example that, so that one of the major things I'm having him going to be working on is in trying to improve on the monthly financial reports, given his experience. He's a CPA, so so hopefully we can address some of those issues, beginning with the temporary stuff.
Okay, any other board member questions or
Yeah,
comments?
Roger, I just wanted to echo, retire the 4th cruiser now would seem to me to be a logical.
I can't. There are too many repairs that are occurring to the existing 3 vehicles that require us to keep the 4.
Then bring us a proposal for a cruiser.
There is one being proposed, being put together that will be both the request. It will have 2 options, one to go with a Tesla and the other with a hybrid. It's currently being drawn up.
Cool. Go ahead, Mary.
I think I might have missed something. So in terms of our finance department, so the status of that at the moment is that there's a temporary person coming in. But what is the status of the our candidates to actually fill a position? Did that completely fall apart, or is that still in play?
So what we talked about at the last meeting was that we needed to take some time before we advertise again for a position, and that we would use a temporary person in the interim of hopefully getting to a time frame where we'll have a better response with regard to advertising yet a 6th time. Yeah.
Okay, I get it now.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sorry. Yep.
Yep.
Thanks, Mary. We're a little over time, but Cheryl Lindbergh, you have a public comment.
No, actually, Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road, Lister comment. Herb, would you check with Becky? When I signed payroll checks, I noticed that a check to Doug Wilberding was listed as a select board item, and I can see that the Lister stipend line is not 50% of this amount, and I have a feeling it's been mixed up and hasn't. I did leave her a note to do to that effect, but I don't think it's been fixed. So
okay.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. So I'm going to move us on then. So let me just find my agenda. The next item is the Ford Sarah request to reduce usage fees for Huntley Meadow. So there's a little bit of a memo in the packet. Claudette, in her preparation for this meeting, pointed out that the rental of the fields are not in the select board fee schedule, but rather they're listed and defined by the recreation department on their website. And so that's just the only other context that I would add to it. Does anyone want to have Herb summarize the work today, or would otherwise just like to engage in conversation? So I'm going to ask folks for their comments unless you want to hear from Herb.
I'd like to hear from Herb.
Okay. Herb, so we know that it's not, I mentioned that's not on our fee schedule, the rental of the field, but that rather the rec department has rates, including a nonprofit rate. And so what can you tell us about the conversations you had with Forsair and like why it is that we're being asked to waive these?
So you're being asked to further reduce the fee from based on the fee schedule that we have for the rental fields. That organization, as the rec director, Bree, has talked to Ford Sayer, as I have talked to them. Bree, they have the nonprofit rate. We offered it at half the rate because it's off season. It's not a field related stuff. And we felt that that was a reasonable off-season rate for the Huntley Meadow. They disagree with that. My recommendation to you folks is to not further reduce that fee because they're already receiving an off-season 50% rate at a nonprofit rate.
Good, John.
So, I mean, I think that it's important to look at what this activity is. So for one thing, as is pointed out in Peter Milliken's letter, this is analogous to a town rec program because there isn't a town rec program for cross-country skiing. It's one of the very few activities that kids are able to do right now during COVID this winter, especially with the added restrictions on cross-border sporting activities. I think also it's important to look at what the use is, right? Like, I think quite honestly, Ford Sayre could just show up and ski on our Huntley because there's a track there for anyone to use. And they're not like, unlike when a lacrosse team is practicing or when a soccer team is practicing or a baseball team is practicing, no one can use that space, right? They're fully occupying that space. But with the cross-country skiing, they're not exclusive there. Other people can come and ski at the same time the kids are skiing. But they thought that it was the responsible thing to do to say, no, this is an organized activity, so we should get explicit permission to do this, and I respect that, and I think that was good of them to do that. I think the final way in which this is very different from what we usually rent the space for is that there's not really wear and tear, right? If you've got a bunch of kids running around on a soccer field, you've got a fair amount of maintenance to that grass that we have to do, and we spend real money doing that. The cross-country track is maintained. We do maintain that track. In the letter from the Ford Sayre folks, they offered volunteer labor to help with that as sort of a, if you let us pay less, which is still 20% of their operating budget to rent this track, then they would be happy to contribute some volunteer labor to help maintain it. So I think there are several things that really do make this different. I don't think it's the good definition of fairness to treat everyone equally when they're situated differently. So I think this is situated differently, and it should be treated a little differently.
Yeah, so the reason why you have it is that I've more or less made my decision. They need to go to you to get a waiver of the fees that you get, that I basically run through you guys on an annual basis now. So I'm not sitting here to argue with you. They're coming to you as sort of an appeal of my decision. Yep.
Understood.
And I just want to clarify, it's actually not in our adopted fee schedule, the rental of the fields.
There could be something in the fee schedule that talks about that the fees are established by the rec director. I think there's a line in there that talks about that. I have to go back and look. I honestly just saw Claudette's question in the email right before the meeting because I've been trying to put the town report together. So.
Any other comments? Otherwise, I mean, any other comments?
I just have a quick one. I did not see, when I reviewed the fee schedule, I did not see any reference to the rec fields at all, just the pavilion.
Okay. Maybe that got taken out through the iterations. Sorry.
Could be. But I find John's, my initial read was to not reduce the fees or waive the fees completely. But listening to John, I'm reversing my thought. And I honestly think we should probably waive the fees for this year, especially. And that's it.
Any other thoughts? Mary or Rob?
I agree with John that it seems like a minimal expense to the town and beneficial, but should it be kicked back to the rec department?
Yeah, Go ahead, Mary.
What, I don't,
Well, if
what do you mean kick back to the rec department?
if the recreation department's responsible for setting fees,
Right.
then theoretically
Can
they,
do that, yeah,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's exactly my point on process, right? Like, so it was important if it was in the fee schedule, which is obviously an unfortunate omission, I would feel like, oh, this is our prerogative. Like, you know, we set these fee schedules, we could choose to waive them. But without that, I feel like I'm just defying a recommendation of the professional staff. And, you know, I also don't really want the precedent of when an organization can't get the answer from, you know, our employees, they need to come and like ask us in a meeting.
Go over their head.
I don't really love that. But that being said, if it were in the fee schedule, I would feel like, you know, well, it's our prerogative to just like do the motion and like make a decision. But it's not. But I also don't, you know, if it were, would we be having a different conversation? Probably. And like, why not, you know, why take that? Why say no on the matter of process and technicality, right? Like, let's pretend it's in the, like, let's pretend it's in the fee schedule and then that it's our formal prerogative to waive, you know, our fees and then, you know, make a decision. So
I think if maybe there's been an oversight throughout the process of the update of the fee schedule, but that, you know, any of the fees that we charge in town are supposed to be a part of that fee schedule. So Bree and I have made our decisions, bringing it forward to you, which generally speaking is the fees adopted by you folks. There's certain latitudes that come into play with regard to the fee schedule, but in this particular instance, this is essentially someone trying to appeal the decision that's in there, and it's your schedule, so you're the ones that ultimately make the decision on that. Maybe too process oriented, but it's definitely something on this particular athletic fields I'll look at for the future.
Okay, yeah. That's great. Thank you. And would you, John or Mary? Go ahead, John.
Sorry, Mary should go ahead.
Yeah, I am inclined not to even make this motion. I'm inclined to stick with the, I mean, it's off-season rate, half the nonprofit rate, just stick with that. So that's how I'm feeling about it. I can understand that it is a terrible year with COVID, but I also don't like this idea of the organization going over the head of our employees.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. So.
John, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of take issue with that characterization. I mean, I think to their credit, right, Herb and Bree said, look, we have parameters that we operate within.
Right.
We're not entitled as Herb and Bree to just change that, right?
Okay.
That's something that if you want that waived, you have to go talk to the select board. So I don't think it's fair to say that they went over their head. I think it's fair to say that they talked to who was in charge of this. Who was in charge of it said, this is what answer we have within our parameters, but you can go talk to the select board and maybe they will give you a different answer.
I see.
Well, I think, so this is a good conversation on process. And so unless we have any more to add, maybe I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion since our official mover is
reluctant.
That's my
preferring not to. So I'm gonna follow Claudette's lead. I move to waive the usage fees on the Huntley Meadow Nordic ski track for use by Ford Sayre ski program according to their request outlined in their letter dated January 11th, 2021 and contained in the select board meeting packet.
Second.
Great. So is there any further discussion or can I roll call? I'm going to roll call. John.
Yes.
Claudette.
Yes.
Rob.
Yes.
Mary.
Abstain.
And I'm a yes. So we have one abstention from Mary. That's smart in terms of process, Mary.
Well, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, okay. Next on the agenda is, oh gosh, okay, the proposed task force addressing Article 36, item 10. So I drafted this. If folks want to hear from me, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, maybe we can go to comments. Go ahead, Mary.
I'm kind of inclined to think of it more as a first reading.
Yeah.
I also am wondering, and it's kind of devil's advocate kind of thinking, so I'm not firm on it, but wondering whether we go down the rabbit hole sometimes on task forces and committees. And if we should just be very clear about what our questions are before we form up another committee. So, you know, are we doing this because we can't think of the questions to ask? Or are we thinking this because we already know the answers and they're kind of either not very easily defined, or they might be informed by information that comes a little later? And as part of it, management, which is really the, you know, town manager's responsibility. So I'm just uneasy about it.
Yeah,
I'm very uneasy about it. And also that with our existing committees, with our, you know, I think the disappointment of the finance committee people in us. Also, do we have a responsibility? What is our responsibility to support committees or to make the charge really clear so that, you know, people don't waste their time or that we get the result that we want? So that's all boiling around in me right now.
Okay. John, did you have some high level thoughts?
Yeah, I think those are good points Mary raises. I think that the pros for your proposal, Roger, is that it is multi-committee, so it recognizes the idea that this isn't just an energy committee issue. There are expertises and interests from the folks that populate our other committees that may be interested in these issues as well and may be helpful to the process. But I am sympathetic to the idea of adding another committee to the process, to add another set of meetings that people have to make time to attend as the committee people, but also the people that care on what's going on there. So I think I'd probably in part come down on that issue in shrinking the size of the committee. I think 9 is ambitious to think that we would be able to field that many folks that could participate in that. I would expect these meetings to be fairly well attended though. And you know, as we all know, you can have as much participation, if not more, as a member of the public as you can someone sitting in one of the seats up front. So, but I thought the general charge was good and it focused on the right stuff.
Any other high level thoughts, Rob or Claudette?
Yeah, I was worried a bit by the number of roles that were defined there, and I wonder if it's possible to make sure we're trying to find people who might fulfill 2 of those roles and not have to go hunting for 9 people to put themselves on the line.
Okay. Claudette?
I had I can't even talk. I think I had more of a problem with not so much of a problem, but a question about the proposed membership.
Yeah.
More so than the charge of the group. I think, you know, there's enough work to be done that if we can get a separate group working on something that we feel is very important, that'd be great. And part of me wants to see more public as well as energy people, or, you know, so it's more the makeup of the group.
Okay.
That I would like to ponder more.
Cool. And so I see public comments, but I'm going to take them at the end of our discussion. Herb, did you have a high level thought?
My only thinking is if you do this, maybe you charge the Energy Committee with having a task force under them. So it's sort of like a task force of the Energy Committee. And that way there can be oversight by that group that keeps things going and moving. And that also helps to perhaps minimize the membership that's there. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's great. John, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'd push back on that. I mean, I think, again, taking Mary's point, and also the process with the geothermal project, I think this needs to be led by the select board. So I think whoever's appointed by the select board to this task force needs to be the chair of it, and that the select board really needs to put its fingerprints on this and say, we prioritize this. We're going to pay attention to it. When you make proposals to us, we will listen to them and act on them one way or the other. I think that'll be important. And quite frankly, I wouldn't blame the Energy Committee if they said, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to step back a little bit on like the context, if I may, which is like, you know, I think like folks came to some meetings after the vote and the revote, and, you know, there was echoes of, you know, how are you going to address this article? Like, how are you going to, as a governing body, take on the reduction of direct fossil fuels? Like, you know, your an advisory body put forward a proposal for that reduction, and, you know, it didn't reach its their intended conclusion, and so now what? And so I think this this charge like proposes several things that you can look at. Because it's about direct fossil fuels, it's speaking largely to buildings, which the preliminary work of the Energy Committee and others have determined that that is like the biggest contribution to direct fossil fuels. It doesn't specifically outline transportation because there was a hope that there would be another sort of advisory group that Herb had that this group would be in communication with. So that being said, like, it's important to talk about what this isn't. You know, you see in other towns like a climate emergency task force, right? This doesn't intend to do that because based on previous work, this town had communicated an interest in direct fossil fuels, wasn't interested in taking on larger issues of climate, of which, of course, there are many. So, you know, I think Mary's point is like really brilliant. Like, why is it like, why, you know, there's something called, why do you need more data to prove what you already know to be true? Right. And I think that is, and so many, when you do these committees, like they create work products that like tell you what you already need to know about, you know, the climate emergency. But I think what this really does is it seeks to take the very good points of, I don't want to say detractors, but people who very much are demanding of, you know, documents and research, and like asks this group to like put that forward. So there's many suggestions of what this group can do, but there's only 3 requirements for the midpoint check-in, which is, you know, finish that the emissions report that has been done by a volunteer for the Energy Committee. Tell us a little bit about the climate fund, the uses of the climate emergency fund. And then I believe the third thing is, oh gosh, I forget the third thing. But the point being, this charge outlines many things that this group can do, but like provides 3 specific things for a midpoint check-in. So like Mary, I'm inclined to consider this a first reading, and then also suggest that we engage some other stakeholders that are named, like the Energy Committee. If the Finance Committee existed, we would send it to them, and like other groups. So that was sort of my thinking. Like, this is just meant to be in response to that question, like, what are you going to do next? And it's like, well, we're going to do some work to create some documents to prove what we already know to be true. Go ahead, Mary.
Just in us mulling over what are we going to do next, and knowing that there's concern, for instance, about the ventilation in Tracy Hall, which hadn't really been on the radar until the consultants came in to talk about the geothermal. And when they had to put in new ductwork, of course, then we learned that the ventilation system is basically grandfathered, but it's not good to have poor ventilation in there. But I think our natural perhaps take on what to do next might be kind of large as far as Tracy Hall. Like we've been talking about, if we really want to do Tracy Hall, we should really evaluate it, because, you know, why, if you're going to go in and spend a lot of ventilation, you should just look at the whole thing and really figure out whether it needs a comprehensive renovation. So we have talked about that.
Yes, and I would say, Mary, that this is not, I think it's a good point. Like, this is not a Tracy Hall task force. It would be a mistake for folks to think in that way. Like, if we could very much work on Tracy Hall as part of a capital project and be in dialogue with, you know, this task force, which is much looking more broadly at direct fossil fuels, which it would be disingenuous to say that direct fossil fuels are anything but our buildings and our transportation, you know, and that there's been some reports by that volunteer, Eva Rosenblum, who talks about direct and indirect. And I imagine that report will be built on, because there's some data missing, because she needs more cooperation from the town, of which that's one of the things that we sort of promised this task force, that I imagine that will be fleshed out and there'll be like a bigger conversation around that. So this is not like a Tracy Hall task force, but this is about direct fossil fuels. And so it's disingenuous that Tracy Hall wouldn't come up, but that doesn't stop us from having our own board conversation on Tracy Hall. And indeed, based on our budgeting the conversations, we're probably gonna have to do something with Tracy Hall, because we talked about that. So anyway, I wanted just to respond to you, and I'm chairing, so I have to open up to conversation. So go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I think that in talking about this proposed charge, I think you've been trying to get at the idea that it's a holistic approach that you have to take. Tracy Hall is just an example of that. I'm not suggesting that there should be a Tracy Hall task force, but I'm saying, in thinking about these things, it does get to a holistic level. So could we work backwards from that and come up with some more simple guiding principles that would guide us, rather than saying, okay, let's send 10 people out in all different directions and just gather a bunch of information. There's got to be some way to boil it down to some scheme that we can use to actually answer some questions. I don't know. I just think there's some different way of doing it. I don't know what it is, but I don't think it's this somehow.
Okay, any other comments from board members before I turn it over to the public? Not seeing anything. Linda Gray had her hand up.
Hi, thank you. And I'll start my video. Linda Gray, 175 Kerwin Hill Road, and I've been active on the Energy Committee for 12 years. So I just want to encourage you guys to do something like this. I think ever since the facilities proposal failed in the revote, the question has been, okay, what do we do? And here we are, we're 2 years past the vote from the public to begin reducing fossil fuels, and we've nibbled around the edges. And so it's like, well, you have to figure out how to get moving. And so typically with a town governance and public input, the way to do it is like you have a committee. And I definitely agree with John Langus's comment that this has to be, I think it has to be an initiative that is fostered and endorsed by the select board. So I encourage you to pursue this.
Thank you. Pam Smith, you have your hand up.
Pam Smith, 1445 New Boston Road. One of the recommendations from the Finance Committee was the establishment of a capital budgeting and planning committee. And I see a lot of the things that would work into this overall reduction plan as capital expenditures, things, whether it's working on Tracy Hall, whether it's buying, Green Fleet, whatever, those seem to be capital purchases to me. And I would think that this, rather than creating an Article 36 task force, you would create a capital budgeting committee and work through that group to analyze, the different options and the ways of reducing our fossil fuel usage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Linda Cook has her hand up.
I have a question. I'm hearing the word task force and committee, depending on who's speaking. Is the reason to use task force mean it's not governed by the open meeting law? There doesn't have to be minutes. There doesn't have to be warnings, and the public will be on the sideline, as opposed to using committee, which would meet the open meeting law. Can you kind of explain to me why we're using all these other descriptions of groups that used to be committees?
I'm happy to call it a committee, but regardless of what we call it, it is considered a public body, and thus it would be subject to the open meeting law. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you.
If anything, I think task force just like highlights how polemical and topical
Urgent,
this
maybe.
is, and urgent this is, but
Yeah.
we can call it, the committee. Okay, so Aaron Lamperti and then Jack Cushman have their hands up.
Hi, Aaron Lamperti, 557 New Boston Road and Energy Committee. I'd just like to encourage you to, to support this initiative in some form. I don't think it's possible for the select board to evaluate all the possible ways that one might address Article 36 without some sort of outside entity putting together a list. I mean, how are you going to do the apparatus bay and the fire department? You guys, the five of you, want to put together ideas about that, or do you want someone outside to give you some suggestions? I would suggest that the charge of this committee be to put together suggestions for all the possible fossil fuel uses in the town, and maybe even to try to sketch out some sort of a schedule that's actually practical, and to start maybe with initial evaluation of proposals from contractors or whatever it would take to get some sort of idea of how practical some of these ideas are, and bring that to the select board. To then you have a menu, and you can choose what you want to bring to the voters or spend your money on from that. But I think you need that before you can really decide what you're going to do. So I support this entity, however it would be formed. Thank you.
I think your comment is reflected in point D of the task force charge. Jack Cushman, do you have a public comment?
Yes, thank you. Like others, I support this general idea, and I understand that this is a first reading and you're going to be doing some drafting. I would encourage you to at least have what I would think of as a broadening clause of some kind, because if you draw your circle too tightly, it can constrain this group and might stand in the way of some of the flexibility, such as the suggestion that Pam Smith made, that this is a matter of capital budgets. Well, you want to make sure that one doesn't say this group shouldn't be considering capital budgets or talking to a group that does consider capital budgets. So to encourage consultation, and all it would take is something like a phrase that says other related issues, or something that allows flexibility without imposing mission creep beyond the initial charge that you're really after this group. The reasons that I suggest this are, that I have repeatedly heard suggestions in the Article 8 discussion. There was the concern that Tracy Hall was not part of a broader plan, or that reducing fossil fuel use was not part of a broader climate action plan. We had the recent suggestions, including Pam Smith's suggestion to conform our town's actions to the economy-wide emission goals of the Global Warming Solutions Act. That was a suggestion that's not going to be on a warrant article, but certainly deserves discussion. And it's also been suggested to me by people in town that ultimately we might want to explore the need for a broader climate council to achieve broader objectives. With respect to Roger's concern, not that is not what this is, you wouldn't want to preclude this group from exploring or recommending that kind of approach. And finally, I just would point out that we're not the only people struggling with how to cut our fossil fuel use or our global warming emissions. There's an urgent process underway in Montpelier under the Global Warming Solutions Act. It's being driven by constant meetings, and they are supposed to come up with concrete solutions. And as we're now saying, the state, at least at the moment, has an unusual amount of money on hand, enough to provide 25 million this year for weatherization projects for residences. And we're all aware of stimulus spending coming out of Washington. You can't turn on the radio without hearing discussion of climate change proposals out of every branch of the government in Washington. We as a town are going to need to be ready when that money begins to flow, that we have what commonly are called shovel-ready projects, but let's call them common sense projects that are eligible and that we've done the groundwork. And this is a very important facet of this group's work, it seems to me, is to put ourselves in the starting blocks. So when the time comes, we just heard on this sidewalk how important the federal funding is to the whole financing of the sidewalk. I strongly believe that we're going to be in a similar position on climate projects in the years ahead. So thanks very much for your work on this, and I look forward to seeing what you decide.
Okay, so I'm going to just summarize what I'm hearing, and then maybe that'll inspire like a little bit of follow-up conversation. So what I'm hearing is people want to, for a second reading, potentially, people want to look at the makeup of the committee, like the roles are defined, the expertise is defined, and there's too many, perhaps. It'll become cumbersome. So people really want that to be taken a look at. I'm also hearing that you might want to have an expansion clause, I think Jack Cushman's words were, to understand that there's climate issues that might go beyond direct fossil fuels, and there's no reason to not have this group take up those issues if it comes up. So that's what I'm hearing in terms of some feedback. Is there any other feedback that I missed or any other further conversation? And then I think we should also send this to our advisory committees for their feedback. So as well. We should send it to the Energy Committee for the benefit of their review and their analysis. Any other comments or thoughts?
I have to think about it more. I think it's really important to keep thinking about this, but I don't have any clear thoughts about it at the moment.
Is anyone not comfortable with adopting this as a first reading? Do we feel fairly comfortable saying that this is, to acknowledge that we have read this, which is what a first reading does? There's no reason to not do that, right?
I think that would be good because it shows we read it and we've thought about it and discussed it.
Yes,
so.
that is right. And the only thing I would say too that, okay, that's great. And then, okay, so Linda, so I would probably ask for a motion like that, but I'm seeing Linda Gray has her hand up.
Hi, thank you. Linda Gray, 175 Kerwin Hill Road. And I think Roger did a very nice summary of all the discussion. And as you wrap it up, and I just want to add this, please do not put this on a parking lot and have it show up in that spot for like 4 more meetings, because like, frankly, I've been waiting since August for you all to figure out, okay, how we got to get rolling on some action. And so I am pleased to see you get started on it, and do not let the ball start rolling back down the hill. Get it going, please. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I agree. I would, with all due respect, Roger, argue against sending this to the committees. I mean, the folks that are interested in it from the committees are here and they're giving us their feedback today. I would say we should have this on the agenda for the next meeting with another round of it. Personally, I'd like to.
I hear you, but we've recently been critiqued for, if you indirectly make a reference to prior work that is not sufficient, you are to formally call on or recognize. So I wanted to just put that out there. I tend to agree. But anyway, Claudette, I see you unmuted yourself. Do you have anything that you would like to add?
I was just going to make a motion.
Yes, please.
So I move to accept the Article 36 Task Force draft as a first read, and revisit this at our next select board revisit, and hopefully adopt at our next select board meeting.
Okay.
Great. Claudette and then John. I'll roll call. Mary?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Claudette?
Yes.
And I'm a yes.
And I just also want to make sure that people know that feedback needs to get back to me by next Thursday, next Wednesday at the latest, whatever number day that is.
Yes. So I'll look to revise based
February 3rd.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Any other, so I'm going to move on if that's okay. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the next is the lister's request for proposal for reappraisal services. In their memo, they specifically asked for our comments. They acknowledged that it was a draft, but asked for our feedback on the content of the proposal. So would anyone like to hear from one of our listers, or would you like to go directly into the request that was listed in the memo?
I'd like to hear from Cheryl.
Okay, great. Cheryl, would you like to summarize what you would like out of us?
Sure. Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road, and chair of the Board of Listers. Basically, we're trying to keep everybody informed. This was an attempt to add any additional knowledge, benefit to an RFP going out, including town manager. And, we just felt it was important to have the document public for anyone else to read. So as we worked quite a bit on it, it was a previous draft or RFP that was done, and we have redone it to a degree to be more neutral. And obviously, as you can see in reading it, we haven't picked a specific date. We're not sure we want to be picking a specific date because we wish to have reappraisal firms respond and give us what they can do as a possible date, but we would like it to be within the next couple of years. So that's some of what I can say to you, and try to field any questions.
Cheryl, can I actually ask you, if possible, to let us, what is it that you are specifically, what is the ask of the governing body? You're just asking for, you asked in your memo for any thoughts on the content of the RFP, but is there anything?
Sure. Anything that you can provide as feedback. And secondly, to know that a commitment of funds will be coming, that will be, by sending this out, we're committing funds for the reappraisal, so that's clear. I know we're setting aside money each year, but depending upon when it takes place, that there's a commitment from the town, the board, to fund the reappraisal.
Right. And I noticed that in the RFP, it mentions that it's dependent on the funds.
Yeah. So any, John's great at contracts or documents, and we've got, others, and we just want to be up front. If there's nothing you want to offer to us, great, we'll move forward. But
yeah, I just wanted to be clear on the ask. And so John maybe has an answer for the ask. Go ahead, John.
So it was a very detailed proposal. I assume it was based on previous ones that we're using as a precedent here. The main question I had out of it is whether you have in the past attached an actual contract. So in all of the RFPs that I've ever sent out to people, most of them that I've responded to, there's a form of contract, and part of responding to the RFP is if you're going to comment on this contract, you need to make it part of your bid. Otherwise, you're agreeing to take the contract as is. And that can be as important as what you're getting from them in the details of their proposal. But, it's certainly like, it's crazy details. It's a 30-page, RFP. So it's definitely not my area of expertise. It seemed comprehensive though. And assuming that was built on ones that we've used successfully in the past. My only other was that hopefully Rod is reviewing this in detail and giving some feedback as our expert within town government.
Rod?
Yes, he said Rod. Yes, Rod Francis.
Oh, okay. Yes, we do have, as we left out for this point, at this point, we left out the contract part, but it will be going out with the RFP to answer that question.
Any other questions or feedback from other board members? I see Herb has his hand up as well. Go ahead, Mary, did you have your hand up?
Oh, just would like to see if and when the contract is ready, would like to see it.
Sure.
Herb, would you have your hand up?
A question based on what you said tonight. Are you looking more for a request for qualification, Cheryl, or an actual request for proposals? I think well, what you've talked about by leaving open-ended and all that, it sounds like you're more looking for requests for qualifications.
So there is a qualified list of reappraisal firms that the state has.
Okay.
So we're only going to send this RFP out to the approved list of reappraisal firms.
Gotcha. Thanks.
My only comment, Cheryl, was that I thought 30 pages was a little unusual. I had, as John says, like I haven't had opportunities to look at these kinds of RFPs before, but so as a result, you look around to see what other folks are doing, what other communities are doing. And I noticed that they're around 10 or 11 pages. And so I had wondered if 30 pages, there's quite a lot of specificity down to like the costs for your cell phone. So I had wondered, if there would be a consideration to maybe go to more concise models, and that having and then wondering perhaps that if it were more concise or shorter, it might very well attract more bidders, so to speak. So, but which is just to say that, I'll send the examples that I have seen and, for whatever that's worth. But
okay.
Yeah.
I would comment back that we gave this to the contract assessor to look at, Spencer, and he just gave us a couple pointers on how Norwich does things differently than many other towns. And our sense is that it's a reappraisal request, and that probably not everybody's going to read it. They have their standard response ready. They'll type it up, put in Town of Norwich, and ship it back to us, probably not having read all the details. But it's, it gives us a basis for what we feel is important. It is one that was used previously and tailored to a little more generic approach. The last one was more specifically looked like things were, I don't know, it just had a sense of it that we had to edit some of the stuff out of that first one and brought it down. We saw the Town of Hartford's.
Yeah.
We looked at that. You know, so we do have some other items there, but
Okay,
we
cool.
don't want to be subject to like, oh, but we wanted you to do that. And it wasn't clear to you. Well, yeah, it is clear that we wanted that done because it's right here on this page. So I don't know. You're right. Shorter can be better. I don't think most reappraisal firms are going to read it. They're going to say, here's what we do, and
Yeah.
here's what it's going to cost you. And we just have to meet with them to sort out whether that's acceptable.
Okay, great. Herb, you have your hand up again.
Sorry, apparently it never came down.
Oh, that would be my fault. Okay, any other, did you put it up again? No, you turned it down. Okay, so Cheryl, was this helpful for your ask?
Well, it is. The fact that Mary brought up wanting to see the contract, we're going to work on that. And we wanted to issue this right after our February 10th meeting, but I think that's the same date as your next meeting. So we can get it done, put it in your packet, and we'll both be on the same timetable. So I think that'll still work. We can issue the RFP like the day or so later.
Okay.
Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'll move us on. Is that okay?
Great.
Okay, so the next one is town meeting preparation. I'm actually wondering if I could call on Claudette a little bit, because I know that you've thought about this and that this was maybe your agenda item. So can I call on you to help frame the identifying of the town meeting prep?
Yeah, actually what I wanted to do was just for us to at least start thinking about what we're going to do for the information session at town meeting, whether it was going to be a short PowerPoint presentation like we did last year, who would be responsible for it, and I'm willing to take that mantle. There was also one piece of correspondence in our packet from a resident who had requested that we hold our information session earlier than the day before town meeting. And it's having conversation with Bonnie, it's because it's not just us, it's also the Dresden School District. That doesn't seem to be possible, but is there a way that we can share information with the town, whether it's to specific select board videos or just a one-page document that lists the warrant articles? I don't know. I'm clutching at straws here, other than how to get the information out to the voters before the night before. So if they're voting absentee, they have some basis to make their vote.
Okay, great. So it sounds like just to paraphrase, the questions are, what format, like what form do we want to create something that summarizes the budget, whether it be a PowerPoint or another kind of document? Do we want to make that available before town meeting day? And I would tack on that there's nothing that precludes us from having multiple special meetings or multiple information sessions beyond, that formal one that you were referencing, Claudette. So that's sort of what I heard from you. Mary, do you have any thoughts? I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think I'm not inclined to go in this direction. And I think as far as presentations, you also just have the town report, it has all the information in it. So I would not be inclined to go in the direction of extra meetings.
Okay.
That's all. Keep it simple.
John?
Does anyone happen to know if the school board has planned for any earlier session to talk through their budget? Coordinating with them would be a good idea, but I don't know that.
I have not heard that they are, but they do have quite a fancy mailer that goes out prior to town meeting.
True.
So Rob, do you have any thoughts, high level thoughts?
No, just other than trying to touch base with the school district to find out if they think they could do something, some
Yeah.
sort of a presentation in advance of the normal time
So
to make
okay.
it worthwhile.
Yeah.
But
So what I would suggest is I think we should absolutely put together something similar to what we've done last year. I'm like happy to like work on that with Claudette since she's also volunteered. And like we could make that available earlier if we start working on it now, and there's nothing that won't prohibit someone from scrolling through a PDF of a future presentation, right? And then as Mary says, like there is they have the benefit of the town report, and so we can make our sort of high level summary of the budget available in a PDF form or a presentation form, which we will then go for the formal information session. I'm fine doing multiple special meetings or, to talk about the budget and to go through that document. What I will say is last year, I think I presented it, and then before like Pepper, I would say that I am keen on having a script that either we divide up or someone reads. I don't want to be it.
you're like bullseyes.
Yeah, I'm happy to develop a script since we're starting early. I'm happy to develop a script and dialogue with everyone, but then either we like take, a couple slides each, or someone reads the script, but
I think it's nice to have one person do it. I mean, I've done it at being called on at the last minute, which was interesting. So it can be done, but I think it's more coherent if one person presents it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would do it if nobody else wants to, but they do also want to rehearse what to say and be clear that it reflects what we all think should be said.
Yeah.
So can somebody remind me, because we've been in this world of COVID, we did actually have an in-person town meeting last year, didn't we? Is that true? Okay, so we also will have a much different effect with having it be a Zoom town meeting, I would think. It's not going to be in person? I don't think so, right?
It's not, and maybe Claudette or Herb can summarize it, but it'll be fairly similar to what we saw in August. From what
Okay. All right.
Yes, it will be like what we had in August.
Okay.
And are we set up for like hundreds and hundreds of people? I can't remember from August if we struggled with people not being able to get in at the end. I think we want to make sure, we get great participation in town meeting. We'll probably lose some because they like being there in person. On the other hand, there's lots of people who can never be there in person because of, work or kid or whatever commitments, and they will be online. So I want to make sure that we're ready for that. As far as a presentation, I'd be happy to do it as my last hurrah on my way out the door.
Sounds good. So how will we know how many people? That's going to be tricky.
So Herb has his Zoom and real hand up, so maybe he can help.
Both hands.
So while I'm talking, Roger, you can put my hand back down.
Yeah.
So so basically it will be set up exactly like the August primary where you had your special meeting on the Tracy Hall, except this one will be all the articles related to the town. CATV will be live through the Zoom with that 20-25 second delay that we have. Basically, CATV does it through their YouTube sort of account. We are going to upgrade for town meeting the membership so that we can, in the event that we have over 100 people, which I think we typically do at town meeting, so that we won't have a blockage of inability to attend the meeting. It will be, again, I've already started having discussions, collaborating with the moderator, John Carroll, about how we're going to deal with a particular meeting. But again, it'll be very similar to the August primary. Because it's Zoom, the only thing I would add is that I would not divide up your presentation between and among members because it's Zoom. I think it would be better to have a single person give the presentation. It's going to be bad enough for the moderator to go back and forth with different people and all that. So that's what only thing I would suggest on that. And then lastly, having additional meetings is perfectly fine, but you cannot move that public informational meeting the Monday night before without a town vote.
Right.
That town vote established date.
Yes, but there's nothing that will stop us from having more information.
Correct. I'm just, yeah. So I mean, if that's specific to the question that came up in the letter from Peg, and that date cannot move without some actual action by the electorate.
Okay, so what I'm hearing and then is John is willing to give the presentation for the board. And I'm also hearing that Claudette and I are willing to work on it. And then also John is, I assume, willing to work on the presentation that he'll give. So that's what I heard so far. So maybe John and then John, I'm not going to fight anyone for this. John and Claudette, do you want to work on the presentation?
I was thinking that you guys would work on it and then you can shoot me a draft and then I'll sort of tweak it for my voice.
I'm happy to do that too if Claudette is fine with that.
Is that, yeah, that works for me.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if yeah, you can't tweak it too much, John, though, because that will be backdoor.
That's, oh, smart.
Or me type.
Perhaps I'll be tweaking it to make it less biased.
Well, this is what we're going to do. This is brilliant because we pay attention to OML and process. So Claudette and I will work on this together. We will bring it back to the governing body and then we'll send it off to John.
Works for me.
That would be good. And then the rest of us can see it as well.
Yeah, and I'll put it in the packet. Whatever I'm proposing is like the final script so that we all talk about it at that, whatever, the February 24th meeting, and everybody agrees that it's not dodgy.
So does Pam Smith have a comment?
She does, and I would like to address that now. Thank you, Mary.
Okay.
Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you. Pam Smith, 1445 New Boston Road. Once this PowerPoint presentation has been prepared and John has a script or whatever, in order to accommodate the request that was in the packet, maybe that PowerPoint presentation could be put up on the town website and then something put on the list of letting people know it's there and they could, study it and then be ready with whatever questions they have. But that would be a good way of getting it out in advance of the March 1st informational session.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the goal. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So sounds like we have a process. Do any more discussion on this or anything that was missed? I'm not hearing anything.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, I feel good. What is the next agenda item? That is it. We can adjourn. Is that right?
Yes,
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Second, third.
So it was Mary and then Claudette. Claudette seconded that. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you for your patience. It's always lovely to get a chance to do this. Claudette will be back.
And Roger, thank you for stepping in with very short notice, but believe me, having tons of little circles on your face is not something you would want to see.
Yeah.
Did we vote on that motion?
No, we're going to do that now. I was just chatting a little. Okay.
Mary.
Mary.
Popular acclamation.
Sorry.
How do you vote, Mary?
I vote yes.
Okay. John, how do you vote?
Yes.
Claudette?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thanks,
Roger.
very much, Roger. And
Thank you.
get well,
Miranda and
Claudette.
Herb.